Regular exercise reduces dementia risk, but one specific activity cuts that risk by 76%, and it isn't running, swimming, or lifting weights. Most people have never heard this statistic, and the ones who have usually dismiss it. That's a mistake. I'm going to explain exactly why, from the neuroscience down to the biochemistry. And by the end of this video, you will understand more about what's happening inside your brain and your joints than most primary care doctors take time to tell you. We are working toward 200,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed yet, do it right now, because what I'm about to tell you isn't something the healthcare system wants you to hear. A system that gets paid when you're sick, not when you're well. Like and subscribe. Let's go. The activity is dancing, and before you roll your eyes and click away, stay with me for 60 seconds, because I am going to explain this the way I'd explain it sitting across from you in my exam room, not as a feel-good pitch, as a physician. I've been in practice for 15 years. I see patients every single day who are on 3, 4, 5 medications for conditions that are, at least in part, the result of the same problem. Their bodies stop doing anything new. They drive the same route to work. They sit in the same chair, they walk, maybe, and their brains are running on autopilot, replaying the same motor patterns they've had since their 20s. No novelty, no challenge, no new signals. There is a clinical term for this, motor monotony. It means your nervous system stops receiving new inputs. Your neural connections, the pathways neurons use to communicate, stop being reinforced, and here is the fundamental truth of neuroscience that most people haven't been told. The brain is not a warehouse with a fixed capacity. It is living tissue. It either grows or it atrophies. Use it with novelty and complexity and it builds new connections. Let it run on repeat for years and those connections thin out, weaken, and eventually fail. Now here's where the dancing data comes in. A study cited by Dr. kenD at Harvard Medical School looked at how different activities affected dementia risk. Reading reduced dementia risk by 35%. Crossword puzzles reduced it by walking, swimming, cycling, had almost no measurable effect on cognitive outcomes. Almost none, and that surprised a lot of people, including a lot of doctors. But when you understand the mechanism, it makes complete sense. Walking on a treadmill doesn't require your brain to learn anything. Your body moves, your brain is essentially idle. It's the cognitive load that matters, the learning, the coordination, the real-time adaptation. Dancing reduced dementia risk by 76%. That is more than twice the benefit of crossword puzzles, and it is not a small study. These are findings that deserve to be in every conversation a doctor has with a patient over 50. And in 2026, researchers at Kyoto University in Japan published findings confirming something that matters enormously in clinical practice. They found that dancing is especially beneficial for people who are already noticing memory slippage. Names they can't retrieve, words that won't come, tasks they keep forgetting, but whose formal cognitive testing still comes back normal. That window has a clinical name, subjective cognitive decline. It's the transitional zone between normal aging and early dementia. It's the moment when intervention actually works before damage becomes entrenched. Dancing during this period functions as a genuine preventive intervention. The disease hasn't taken hold yet. You can slow it and possibly stop it. Let me tell you about a patient of mine. I'll call her Carol, 63 years old, retired school teacher, came in for her annual physical. Sharp woman, well-read, used to do the Sunday crossword every week. But she'd been noticing for about 18 months that she was forgetting student names she'd known for years, forgetting where she put things, losing the thread in conversations. Her cognitive testing was perfectly normal. I told her what I'm telling you now. 6 months later, she came back and said the fog had lifted. She had started taking a beginner salsa class at a community center 2 nights a week. That's it. That's no new medication, no expensive intervention, just dancing. Why does this work at the neurological level? Let me walk you through what's happening inside the brain when you learn a new dance movement. 2 structures do the heavy lifting. First, the basal ganglia, deep clusters of neurons sitting at the base of the brain that are responsible for learning and storing movement sequences. These are the structures that let you eventually execute a movement without consciously thinking about it. They build what we call motor memory. Second, the cerebellum, a fist-sized structure at the back of the skull that controls the smoothness, accuracy, and coordination of movement. When your cerebellum is well trained, you move fluidly and with control. When it's undertrained, as it is in most sedentary adults, movement becomes stiff, choppy, and people start stumbling, losing balance, misjudging steps. But here's what makes dancing categorically different from every other form of exercise. While those two structures are working, 4 additional zones of the brain are firing simultaneously. The kinesthetic zone, your brain's map of where your body is in space. The auditory zone, processing rhythm, tempo, musical phrasing. The limbic system, the emotional center, processing the pleasure and social energy of movement. And the prefrontal cortex, the executive planner, making real-time decisions about what move comes next. 6 distinct brain regions working in parallel. No other activity does this. Not chess, not complex professional work, not yoga. Dancing is the most cognitively demanding physical activity a human being can do, and the evidence is now solid on that point. There is also a principle here that most people miss. The smoother you try to make a movement, the harder your cerebellum works. Not faster, not more complicated, smoother. When you pursue that fluid, controlled, continuous quality of motion, the kind that looks easy but isn't, you are specifically training the cerebellum. And current research has expanded our understanding of what the cerebellum actually does. It's not just motor control. The cerebellum participates in cognitive speed, how fast you process information, in attention switching, the ability to shift focus from one thing to another without losing track, and in emotional regulation. So, every slow, deliberate, smooth movement that you make in a dance class is a direct investment in the sharpness of your mind. Now let's talk about what happens below the neck. Most people come into my office with one of 2 complaints about their spine pain or stiffness, and most of them are spending money on treatments, chiropractic, massage, cortisone injections that provide temporary relief without addressing the underlying cause. That cause, more often than not, is one simple thing. The spine stopped moving. Your intervertebral discs, the cartilage pads that sit between each vertebra and act as shock absorbers, have no blood supply of their own. None. They get their nutrition entirely through diffusion. Here's how that works. When the disc is compressed by movement, it pushes fluid out. When the compression releases, it draws fresh fluid back in like a sponge. Move your spine regularly, and your discs stay hydrated, nourished, and resilient. Sit motionless for hours every day, which is what most American adults do, and your discs slowly dehydrate, stiffen, and begin to degrade. That's how disc herniations begin. That's how chronic back pain starts. Not from too much movement, from not enough. I want you to picture a specific movement, a full body wave, starting from the top of the vertebral column and rolling all the way down to the sacrum, letting each segment of the spine flex and extend in sequence, the way seaweed moves in a current. That movement, which you see in West African dance and hip-hop and contemporary styles, simultaneously mobilizes the cervical spine in your neck, the thoracic spine in your mid-back, and the lumbar spine in your lower back. No single physical therapy modality addresses all 3 regions in one movement pattern. Not one. Dancing does. A few minutes of that kind of full body wave done regularly loosens the ligaments, nourishes the discs, and releases the paraspinal muscle tension that builds up from hours of sitting in front of a screen. And along the spine, running in parallel chains on either side of the vertebrae, are the sympathetic nerve trunks. These are part of your autonomic nervous system, the system that runs your heart, your lungs, your digestive tract, your kidneys without you thinking about it. Spine is locked up and immobile for years. Nerve signal transmission through these chains gets sluggish, not catastrophically, but steadily over time. This is part of the clinical explanation for something I see in practice constantly. Patients with chronic back pain who also have irritable bowel syndrome or intermittent arrhythmia or hormonal irregularities. The spine is not just a structural column. It is a conductive highway. Restoring spinal mobility through movement restores that conductivity. Now, joints, I need to address a myth that I hear at least 3 times a week in my exam room. The idea that movement wears joints out, it doesn't. Incorrect movement wears joints out, and inactivity wears joints out. The cartilage inside your joints is nourished by synovial fluid, a lubricating liquid produced by the joint's lining when it's loaded with movement. No movement, no synovial fluid, dry cartilage, early arthritis. That is the mechanism of osteoarthritis in sedentary people. It is not age alone that destroys joints. It is disuse. There's a movement you see in virtually every dance tradition that has roots in Latin America, the Caribbean, or West Africa. A soft, bouncing quality in the knees. The knees never lock straight. They absorb each step with a gentle yield. Biochemically, this is close to ideal for long-term knee health. When you walk or stand with rigid locked knees, every footfall sends an impact force directly into the articular cartilage. Repeated thousands of times a day, that wears the cartilage down. When the knee bends slightly to absorb impact, the force is transferred to the large muscles of the thigh and calf. The cartilage is spared, This is the difference between a joint that holds up for 90 years and one that's replaced at 65. It's also the principle behind why we tell post-surgical patients to avoid high-impact activity. The bounce and dance is not aesthetic flair. It is joint preservation mechanics. I also want to address the shoulder specifically because shoulder pathology is epidemic in American adults. The shoulder is the most mobile joint in the entire body. It can rotate in 360° across multiple planes. That mobility is its greatest asset and its greatest vulnerability. When you sit at a desk with your shoulders elevated and locked for 8 to 10 hours a day, and most of my patients do, the joint capsule begins to contract. The tissue thickens and tightens. The clinical term for the end stage of this process is adhesive capsulitis, commonly called frozen shoulder. The person literally cannot lift their arm above chest height. It is painful. It is debilitating. Physical therapy takes months. The primary prevention is simple. Move your shoulders through their full range regularly. The isolated shoulder rolls and shimmies you find in African and Caribbean dance traditions do exactly that. They are essentially preventive physical therapy wrapped in rhythm. Let's talk about the hip and pelvis. Hip rotation, the movement that looks expressive and sensual in salsa, reggaeton, or West African styles, is from a clinical standpoint a therapeutic intervention for some of the most common musculoskeletal complaints I see. The iliopsoas muscle, it runs from your lumbar vertebrae through the pelvis and attaches to the femur, is chronically shortened and spasmed in virtually every adult who sits for a living. When the iliopsoas is in chronic spasm, it pulls the lumbar spine forward and down, creating a constant low-grade compressive stress on the lower back. My patient James, 57, accountant, had been living with persistent lower back pain for 6 years, had 2 rounds of physical therapy, saw a chiropractor for a year, walked into my office. I asked him one question. When did you last rotate your hips freely? He looked at me like I was speaking a different language. Hip spasm doesn't stop at the lower back. The pelvic floor muscles, the hammock of muscle tissue at the base of the pelvis that supports the bladder, bowel, and reproductive organs, are intimately connected to the iliopsoas and the internal hip rotators. When the whole pelvic complex is chronically tense and immobile, the downstream effects are wide. Bladder urgency and frequency, constipation, in women painful menstruation, in men chronic pelvic pain that often gets misdiagnosed as prostatitis, when in reality it's myofascial pelvic syndrome, meaning muscle tension, not infection or inflammation. Regular hip rotation mobilizes all of these structures. Gradually, gently, without surgery, without injections, without prescriptions. One more practical point about hip rotation. When you first try it, one side will be freer than the other. That asymmetry is not random. It reflects years of accumulated structural imbalance. One-sided sitting posture, a past ankle sprain that changed your gait, mild scoliosis, habitual weight bearing on one leg. The tight side is the clinically relevant side. That's where the restriction lives, and that is the side you need to work. Not to the point of pain, but consistently, persistently, in the direction that feels blocked. That is the actual rehabilitation. Now, the cardiovascular system. A study published in PLOS 1 by researchers at Northeastern University found that free-form dance movement, not choreographed, not structured, just moving your body expressively to music, meets the American Heart Association's guidelines for cardiovascular health. 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. Dancing is a full cardio workout without the joint impact of running, without the monotony of the elliptical machine. The heart doesn't know or care whether you're on a track or in a living room. It responds to the metabolic demand, and dancing produces that demand in a way that people actually want to sustain, which matters enormously for compliance. Let me talk about bone density for a moment, because this is genuinely underappreciated. Rhythmic mechanical loading, the kind produced by dancing where your body bears weight in varied directions across varying tempos, stimulates osteoblasts, the cells that build bone tissue. Your bones respond to mechanical stress by increasing their mineral density. This is the same principle behind weight-bearing exercise prescriptions for osteoporosis prevention. Research shows regular dance activity can slow bone density decline by 20 to 30%. For women approaching or past menopause and for men over 60, this is not a small number. That's the difference between a fall that results in a fracture and a fall you walk away from. Back extension, the arched, open-chested movement you see in tango, in African dance, and contemporary styles strengthens the erector spinae, the deep longitudinal muscles running alongside the vertebral column. These muscles form the natural internal brace of the spine. When they're weak, The spine collapses under load, discs get asymmetrically compressed, and herniation becomes likely. In a gym, back extension work is boring, equipment dependent, and most people skip it. In a dance form, it happens naturally, rhythmically, with full body engagement, and people do it for 45 minutes without noticing. Wide stance with a slow weight shift from one leg to the other, a movement you see in dozens of dance traditions across cultures, is a slow tempo isometric load on the quadriceps and hip abductors. Isometric means the muscle is under tension without rapid shortening. This type of loading is particularly valuable for people who've been deconditioned, meaning they haven't trained in years, because it minimizes injury risk while building functional strength. And here's why the thigh muscles matter beyond just walking upstairs. The quadriceps and hamstrings are the primary venous pump for the lower extremities. They squeeze the veins in the leg with every contraction, pushing blood back up toward the heart against gravity. Weak thigh muscles mean poor venous return, pooling blood, varicose veins, swollen ankles by end of day, chronic leg fatigue. Strong thigh muscles mean healthy circulation, lower clot risk, and better cardiovascular efficiency. Now let's talk about what's happening in your brain chemistry. Not the structural neuroscience, we've covered that, the biochemistry of mood. When you dance to rhythmic music, your brain simultaneously releases dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of motivation and reward, the chemical that makes you want to get up and do something again. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter of emotional stability. Low serotonin is associated with depression and anxiety. Endorphins are the brain's internally produced pain-reducing compounds, and they are responsible for the euphoria people describe after intense physical activity. This is the same biochemical combination that antidepressants are designed to approximate. The difference is that antidepressants come with side effects, tolerance development, and discontinuation syndromes, what patients call withdrawal. Dancing produces the same neurochemical state through a mechanism the brain recognizes as natural, with no side effects and no withdrawal. Research data shows that a single dance session reduces circulating cortisol, the primary stress hormone, by 25 to 40%. This matters clinically because cortisol, when chronically elevated, does two things that concern me as a physician. It damages neurons in the hippocampus, the region of the brain most responsible for memory formation and retrieval, and it suppresses immune function. Lowering cortisol is not a wellness cliche. It is direct neuroprotection. It is immune support. Reducing cortisol by 30% in a 45-minute dance session is a meaningful clinical outcome. Australian researchers found that dancing restores psychological health and cognitive function more effectively than any other form of physical activity tested in both young and older adults. And York University published research showing that patients with Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological disorder in which the dopamine-producing neurons of the motor system die off, showed measurable improvements in concentration, memory, and daily functional performance when they danced regularly, even as the underlying disease continued to progress. This points to something important. Dance builds what neurologists call neural reserve, extra capacity, a buffer, so that even as the brain sustains damage, it can continue to function because it has more to lose before function degrades. Dance movement therapy is now formally recognized as a psychotherapy modality in clinical settings across the United States and Europe. It is used in treatment protocols for major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and neurodegenerative disease. This isn't alternative medicine. This is evidence-based clinical practice. Here is something I want you to think about for a moment. After age 45, the rate at which the brain's capacity for neuroplasticity, its ability to forge new connections, begins to accelerate downward. After 60, that decline becomes steeper. This is not inevitable deterioration. It is a trajectory that can be altered, and it is precisely at this stage of life when learning new, unfamiliar, coordinately complex movements becomes most critical. New motor patterns at 50 are not just exercise. They are a direct intervention against cognitive aging. So, how old are you? I'm asking seriously, not rhetorically. Write it in the comments, because the recommendations I can give you about what type of dance activity is most appropriate, what intensity is safe, and what physiological benefits are most urgent differ substantially depending on whether you're 38 or 68. Age is a clinically relevant variable here, and it shapes everything I tell you in my office. So here's what I want you to actually do after this video. First, start dancing for 10 to 15 minutes every day. Not at a studio, not with a partner, in your living room by yourself, to music you enjoy. 10 minutes is enough to trigger every mechanism I described. The barrier to entry is zero. There is no equipment, there is no membership fee, there is no commute. Second, every session try at least one movement you haven't done before. The neurological benefit of dancing comes almost entirely from novelty. Once a movement becomes automatic, its impact on neuroplasticity drops significantly. The learning is the therapy. Keep pushing your edge. Third, aim for smoothness, not speed. Slow, controlled, fluid movement is harder than it looks. It demands more from your cerebellum, activates more deep stabilizer muscles, and provides more genuine neuromuscular training than fast, imprecise movement. When you move slowly, there is no momentum to help you. Every inch of that motion is pure muscle work. Fourth, identify your restricted side and work it. If your left hip won't rotate as freely as the right, that asymmetry is a clinical finding. Work into the stiffness, not aggressively but persistently. That is where your body is compensating, loading unevenly, and building toward pain. Fifth, let go of rigid control. When you allow your body to move with genuine freedom, not micromanaging every muscle, the deep stabilizers of the spine and pelvis engage spontaneously. These are muscles that don't fire in routine daily movement. They need unpredictability to activate. Free movement is their training stimulus. The most effective medicine is often the kind you don't need a prescription for. 5 minutes of dancing does more for your spine than a bottle of anti-inflammatories. 20 minutes does more for your mood than a lot of what gets prescribed for mild anxiety. 30 minutes 3 times a week does more for your long-term cognitive health than most supplements on the market combined. I'm Sam Waterling, and I've spent 15 years watching patients pay for outcomes they could have prevented. That's not a criticism of patients. It's a criticism of a system that is financially structured around treating illness rather than building health. The system isn't going to tell you this. They profit when you fill prescriptions, not when you learn to dance. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to kenD Barry. We are building toward 200,000 people who want real information from a practicing physician. I'll keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them.